If courage was a person, it'd be Amy Wax. She was my law school professor at the University of Pennsylvania and a figure of controversy. You might not have heard of her, but she is definitely well known or infamous in political circles, in higher education, and in the legal profession. She has made many controversial statements over time, and there's talks of revoking her tenure. I'm gonna defend her character as someone who has seen her up close. But first, I'm going to explain to you why I don't think that she should be punished for saying the things that she did. Now, I know quite a few people who went to Penn Law, black people, Asian people, and of course, white people, who are like, I don't see how what she said was so utterly reprehensible. It's true, but of course, these things were said behind closed doors because they knew the reaction they would get from the mob had they shared their opinion out in the open. It became so toxic to the point that people were like, okay, I don't even want to have a dialogue. Okay, it's not my fight. I'll just shut up. I'm gonna make it my fight because I really want to stick it to them. And so to start off, I'm gonna take some of her statements piece by piece and explain why, in my opinion, it's not offensive. Starting with her premier statement, the piece de resistance, the statement that made her public enemy number one. We have this quote. Here's a very inconvenient fact. I don't think I've ever seen a black student graduate in the top quarter of the class, and rarely in the top half. I can think of one or two students who were scored in the top half of my required first year course. Now, you can imagine the reaction. They said, oh, she must grade unfairly because she's racist, even though if you knew anything about law schools, you know that law schools do blind grading. They were like the academic mismatch theory, the theory that when you lower the admission standards for black students, that they're not going to be able to compete as well with those who are admitted under a more exacting standard. They were like, oh, the academic mismatch theory has been thoroughly debunked, which they always say inconvenient truths are myths that have been debunked. That's their MO. And get a load of this bullshit. Our dean at the time said Professor Wax spoke disparagingly and inaccurately. Black students have graduated in the top of the class at Penn Law. And he continues, and contrary to any suggestions otherwise, black students at Penn Law are extremely successful, both inside and outside of the classroom, in the job market, and in their careers. Who was saying otherwise? Not Amy Wax. This is just grandstanding. Okay, I think it's really important to mention, I've met plenty of black Penn Law students that are stuff of greatness. Okay, I'm not just saying that. There are many black Penn Law students that have achieved far greater things than I have, and they're like 3 years younger than me, okay? It's not about that. The point is that when you lower the standard for one group, they're probably not going to be able to perform as well as those who are admitted under a more demanding standard. People don't even want to admit that the standards were lowered. They throw around buzzwords like holistically to sort of dilute themselves and muddy the waters, but the data is really clear. Okay, it takes far lower GPA and LSAT scores for a black applicant to get into the same law school as their white or Asian counterparts. And why is that? I happen to think that it's just simply because there's not as big a pool of black students in the highest percentiles vis-a-vis test scores and GPAs as their white or Asian counterparts. And if they want to achieve the racial balancing they seek, they have to lower the standard. Which, there is nothing wrong. I think it's a good thing to want racial diversity in the classroom. A little bit questionable how they go about it. And those black law students who get into the same school as their Asian or white counterparts with the same GPA and same LSAT get much higher scholarship. Even though at an Ivy League school, a healthy majority of black students are from upper middle class backgrounds. In any case, why would the statement not make sense? The LSAT, for one, is an indicator of your intelligence and your aptitude. It's the best indicator for law school performance, a better indicator than the GPA. And yes, effort plays a part, but there's a floor and a ceiling. A floor beneath which a person above average intelligence will not score, and a ceiling above which the person of average intelligence will not score. Actually, there's a floor and a ceiling for all applicants, and where you range within that floor and ceiling depends on your effort, luck. If at any given law school, black students have lower LSAT scores than their Asian or white counterparts, it makes sense why they would not be represented at the top of the class, at least proportionally. And the only real way to know would be to see the data. The school denied it, and then people were like, well, then show us your data. And if I recall correctly, the school said something along the lines of, oh, we're not going to violate our students' privacy. That's below our dignity. They think we're stupid. How does aggregate anonymized data violate anyone's privacy? You know what I really think is going on? I think that Amy Wax is right. The school knows it because they have the data, but they don't want to say it because it'd be like taking a shot at affirmative action, and so they don't want to release it. And the reason why I say this is because if they were right, they proudly show off their anonymized aggregate data and say, hey, see, look, here is how you're 100% wrong, you racist. You see, our data reflects an equal racial distribution of top grades proportional to the racial demographic of the student body. In the top quarter of our class, we have 60% white, 20% Asian, 10% black, 10% Hispanic, just like our wonderful, diverse, and inclusive student body. Release the data. Very simple. Next statement. So the next statement, this statement led to a huge backlash. The US will be better off with fewer Asians. Ouch. Ouchie. Okay. Here's the thing. I disagree. But it's my choice whether to be offended or not. I don't have to be offended. That's always the case. And guess what? My response to that statement is also not going to please the people who are offended by it. And I don't think that their offense has any bearing on the truthfulness of what I'm saying. The professor and I had talked about many things, and she probably knows my position on this, but if I were asked directly, I would say, I respectfully disagree, Professor. I think that the US would be better off with more Asians. It might be because I'm Asian, but I think Asians are first world people. Oh shit. What do I mean by that? Mentality. Culture. If cultural differences exist, that necessarily means that certain cultures are better or worse, at least in terms of what we regard as virtues and vices. So what am I talking about? Respect for the elderly, hierarchy, deference to greater rank, filial piety, a sense of duty towards one's parents. And here's a big one. Respect for public space and things that don't belong to you. You could import 2-3 million Asians to the US today, and you're not gonna see gang sign graffitis in and between subway stops, on billboards, on stop signs, on bus stops, on the windows of small businesses, and you're not gonna see even a tiny spike in violent crime. In fact, violent crime per capita would go down dramatically. If you're being honest with yourself, you know that's true. You're not going to see random elderly people being punched on the street. That's unheard of in Asia because we respect and venerate our elderly. Now, just FYI, I'm not perpetuating the myth of the model minority. Here we go again with that myth bullshit. Because I'm saying that everyone, not just minorities, should model after certain aspects of Asian culture. Does that help? And in turn, Professor Wax might defend Western culture, and I might agree or disagree with her depending on what she's saying. That's it. That's all there is. That's all there has to be. Chill the fuck out. I'm sorry that you might find what I say offensive. Sorry, not in the apology sense, but rather in the sense of expressing my sympathy. As in, I'm sorry for your loss. A reason. Next statement. Now, this was about Indian immigrants who come to the US and become doctors, the ultimate position of repute, and complain about how racist our medical system is. Take the Brahmin women who come from India. They climb the ladder, they get the best education, we give them every opportunity, and they turn around and lead the charge on we're racist, we need reform, our medical system needs reform. Here's a problem. They're taught that they're better than anyone else because they're the Brahmin elites, but on some level, their country's a shithole. Okay. Now, I personally would never call another country a shithole in public because people have pride in their countries, and that's a good thing. It's a virtue to be patriotic and love your country. It's only here that that's ever in question. And I personally love India, and I think that Indian culture has provided vast contributions to the world that I have the privilege to enjoy. But I mean, if you're saying that the country in question is worse, and by worse, I mean in measurable objective metrics we regard as good indicators for how well a society is functioning, I'm not going to argue with that. Okay? But this is the point that was glossed over in the ensuing outrage, the actual point that she was making. It used to be the case that it was an implicit understanding. It did not need to be spoken out loud. It was part of the social contract that when someone comes into a country, you express gratitude and you don't shit on it. It rubs people the wrong way. basic psychology rooted in our biology, the disdain towards ingratitude. Here's another basic psychology at play. We also don't like it when the pot calls the kettle black. It also rubs people the wrong way when you criticize something when your something is objectively worse. Okay, so like if someone called you fat and they're fatter than you, your mind would immediately go, you're fatter than me. I'm what you should be aiming for. Or when someone says something like, oh, you drive a 3 Series, that's not really a Beamer. Oh yeah? Look at the car you're driving. Keep talking shit out your Honda. That's a quote. So that's how people feel when someone comes into a country and starts talking shit. People's minds jump to, oh, you're so high and mighty because the country you came from is so much better. And they're not wrong. Now, this might be a little bit more interesting to her character. How is she like in her personal dealings with others? You would think from the way that the media talks about her that she's devil incarnate. And you might have heard a couple students had levied accusations against her, saying that she had said something offensive to them. Something along the lines of, oh, you're only here because of affirmative action. It's not cool to say that regardless of whether it's true. You don't say certain things to people. I think that's rude. But you know what I really think? I don't buy it. Not one bit. Because I've been around people like this for years. I've seen this circus. Okay? They're so up their ass, busy smelling their own farts while holding up their platinum victim card, that their perception of the world and their interactions with others is seriously warped. I've seen this countless times. And so in my opinion, they're either knowingly making it up because they think that the righteous ends justify the grotesque means, or they're so blinded by their hatred that this shades their recollection. And it's not just my intuition, it's from seeing Amy Wax up close. She carries herself with the utmost integrity. For example, when a student disagrees with her in class, or sometimes it's not just a disagreement, it's more so a diatribe, she sits, waits, listens, doesn't interrupt. And when it's her turn to talk, she's assertive in her position. But there's no one-upsmanship, gotcha, going for the kill, none of that. She just respectfully states her opinion, and I think that's the mark of a true jurist. And when I asked her, Professor, doesn't it scare you to go up in front of an audience who hate you and want to tear you down? And she said, well, I like to think of it more as a conversation than a hostile exchange, because that way you actually do hear the other person out and you're not just thinking of ways to beat them down while they're talking. And true to form, during my last semester while I was studying under Professor Wax, my peers had posted flyers attacking her character, and I reached out to her and I said, hey, are you okay? Because I know how I would be if someone did that to me. I'd be in bed. And she was like, no, I'm fine. And I pressed her a little bit, and she said, okay, what do you want me to say? It does bother me, but what's the point of moping about it? If I want to be able to say my piece freely, other people have to be able to say their piece. Otherwise, it doesn't work. This is a woman of integrity, which is more than I can say about the petulant children that's trying to shut her down. And I stand by that wholeheartedly. And it's just, okay, and it's just little things like she's considerate and polite in her interactions with others. I've seen how she interacts with wait staff, for one, and I think that's an indicator of character. As someone who has waited tables for years, and I recently started again and I'm enjoying myself, but it reminded me how much it messes with my mood when the customer is rude. And I thought about it, and I think it's because they can say things to me and they can pile on, but I still have to be nice. Which, it's fine, it's my job, customer's king, whatever, but it still messes with my mood. And anyway, what did I really want to say about Amy Wax? I have the utmost respect for Amy Wax. I think that she's a woman of monumental courage. She has more balls than the entire Penn Law faculty combined. In fact, I happen to think that those law school professors that have ganged up on Amy Wax should feel shame. Shame for not understanding that they stand on the shoulders of those who came before them, who fought tooth and nails for academic freedom, so that ideas that were out of vogue with society could be discussed for their merit, like evolution and atheism. Imagine if these subjects could not be studied in academia because so many people found it objectionable. Imagine if the universities had said, there's no merit to this whatsoever, this doesn't even warrant a discussion, we're going to shut it down. It's dangerous. There were people saying that, and as a result, the concept of tenure was born. And now they want to strip Amy Wax of tenure. These professors, they should feel shame that they're not living up to their duties to their posterior. You're not fit to be a torchbearer. You have not filled your shoes. To fill your shoes, you would have to proclaim, in the style of Evelyn Beecher's Hall, when speaking about Voltaire's character, I detest what you're saying, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. Amy Wax certainly would. Get some balls and tell your emotional students, hey, I also don't agree with what she's saying, but I'm not going to attack her ability to say it as a professor, because that affects all of us. Amy Wax is also a woman of towering intellect. Yale, Harvard educated, doctor, neurologist, lawyer, assistant solicitor general who argued before the Supreme Court, law professor at elite law schools, and her detractors can't really take that away from her. But more importantly, she's a woman of integrity. She has an unshakable sense of right and wrong, and in her view, and mine, she is insisting on that sense of right in a world where increasingly up is down is up, right is wrong, and wrong is right. Things like mindless worship of criminals, disavowance of concepts like hard work, meritocracy, self-reliance, and equality of outcome despite differences in intergroup input, which is to say justice is being perverted. And from what I see, she practices what she preaches is the right value to have. She's kind, considerate to her friends and foes alike. She sees her foes as human beings or peers in disagreement, which is more than I can say for those people. I don't believe a single thing they say about her in the press. Not one. It's complete bullshit, gross misrepresentation, rank character assassination of someone they don't even know. I don't buy it, and neither should you. Now, I've wanted to say this for a long time, but I was kind of scared too because so many people in my school hate our fucking guts. But I graduated. Oh, wait. Woohoo! And so I feel a little bit freer. So I want to say, hey, why don't we start a public pressure campaign, like the woke say? If anyone watching wants to do something about the fact that the school has put her in a disciplinary proceeding and wants to strip her of her tenure, I encourage you to write to them, write emails, write letters, call them. Now, the best way to go about it would be to be respectful. Don't use any profanities because, okay, I know I used my profanities in my video, but don't use any profanities because it will be a lot easier for them to discount what you're saying, okay? And so, let them know, like, hey, I think Amy Wax is saying some uncomfortable truths, but we cannot penalize people for saying the truth. You might not think that it's the truth, but that's the whole point of a debate. Only untruths are afraid of the light. You would think that people would know that at a law school. As for her opinions, in order for the marketplace of ideas to work, you can't have a monopoly on opinions as some leftist academics would have it. If you go on like this, you're going to leave a stain on the history of the University of Pennsylvania. My God, get a grip. Anyways, you guys, thanks for watching.